Vietnam, I consider to be the most dynamic of all the ASEAN countries. I've been there since 1992. They're energetic, they're intelligent, they're determined to make up for 40 plus years of war. We give scholarships to all our ASEAN neighbors, and the Vietnamese students are the most serious, the most intelligent, and score high marks, and they go back to build Vietnam. So I would say in 20 years, Vietnam will be a small tiger or a little dragon.
Lee Kuan Yew was bullish about Vietnam's future, even admitting they could quickly catch up to Singapore, stating, "The Vietnamese are very smart. We can see it from the students we give scholarships to. They catch up and they are 1/3 of our salaries, 1/4 the price of our land." You see, Lee's positive outlook was driven by the belief that unlike other Southeast Asian nations, Vietnam's cultural DNA matched the engine behind the economic miracles of Japan, South Korea, and China. He stated, "I have always thought it a grave mistake to classify Vietnam as Southeast Asian. By its history, ethnic affinities, and cultural patterns, Vietnam is East Asian, not Southeast Asian." Yet, despite his faith in Vietnam's culture and its increasingly educated youth, Lee harbored some reservations about its trajectory. Here are the core reasons why Lee Kuan Yew believed Vietnam might still fall short of its potential. First, we have the China trap. For context, Vietnam today is one of Asia's hottest economies, with GDP growing 8% in 2025. Foreign direct investment has hit an all-time high, with Samsung, Intel, Foxconn and Lego building major facilities there following Trump's tariffs. On paper, it's exactly the kind of East Asian manufacturing miracle Lee always believed Vietnam was capable of. However, many of Vietnam's brand new factories are just glorified assembly lines. Multinationals simply import the expensive parts from China, assemble in Vietnam, and ship them out, meaning Vietnam only keeps a tiny fraction of the profit, adding very little to their own innovation. This is the China trap in its purest form. Vietnam is growing, but China is either capturing most of that value or worse, dominating industries that Vietnam is trying to get into.
Vietnam.
Vietnam is a special case. It's a long history of non-friendliness, and they're chary of the Chinese, and they're not chary of just for political reasons. I mean, you take motorbikes, for instance. If they have free trade agreement with China, their motorbike industry will be wiped out. The Chinese motorbikes will be cheaper and better.
So they can't have a free trade agreement?
No. Not only can they not have a free trade agreement, they cannot really get close to China.
The gap today is visible in the EV space. China has the likes of BYD, a global titan now selling in dozens of countries. Vietnam's closest equivalent, VinFast, has burned through billions in losses. Its US expansion has stalled, and it is fighting for survival. But Vietnam isn't standing still. Capitalizing on Western anxiety about China's dominance in critical technologies, Vietnam is aggressively positioning itself as an alternative semiconductor hub, having the world's second largest rare earth reserve and attracting chip design investment from Nvidia, Samsung, and Intel. However, escaping China's shadow is harder than it looks, not just economically, but geographically. Vietnam has overlapping territorial claims with China in the South China Sea, sitting above critical oil and gas reserves both countries consider vital.
What did you think of Secretary Clinton's speech in Hanoi?
I thought it was good. She drew the red lines. These claims over the islets must go in accordance with the law of the sea and not just by brute force.
The Chinese had sort of said we have...
They produced an old map.
An old map that said these are ours,
That's right.
Navigational rights. But here's an interesting question. Some people looked at that and especially some Chinese, and said by going to Hanoi and making that speech, it was an insult to us.
No.
What?
I mean, he would rather not have that speech made at all.
Yeah, of course.
But Lee predicted that Vietnam will figure out a way to manage the China trap, stating, "Vietnam is one of the unhappiest nations when it comes to the expansion of Chinese power." Deng Xiaoping attacked North Vietnam in 1979 in retaliation for them making a move on Cambodia. It is not a lesson the Vietnamese will forget. You see, in 2023, the United States and Vietnam upgraded their relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership, the highest diplomatic level Vietnam offers. To put that in perspective, this is a country the US was carpet bombing 50 years ago, but Lee predicted this geopolitical shift, stating, "One strategy probably already being discussed within the Vietnamese government is how they can begin cultivating long-term security ties with the Americans." But Vietnam isn't burning bridges with Beijing either. In 2025, Xi Jinping flew to Hanoi and signed agreements on supply chains and a new railway connecting the two countries. It's the exact playbook Singapore has executed for 60 years, staying economically tied to China while remaining close to America. But this tightrope is nothing new for Vietnam, which has navigated the shadow of its northern neighbour ever since breaking free from a millennium of Chinese rule. Next, we have Lee's views on Vietnam's corruption. While it's improved recently, Vietnam today ranks 81 out of 180 countries on the Corruption Perceptions Index. Lee himself had intimate knowledge of Vietnam's embedded corruption when a Singapore company was extorted during a legitimate construction project. Lee stated, "They did not understand that one happy investor would attract many more. Their idea was that when you had an investor ambushed in a corner, it was your chance to squeeze as much out of him as you could." Fast forward to today, and Vietnam, like China, is making big moves to crack down on corruption, punishing more than 168,000 party members since 2016. However, the man leading both the anti-corruption campaign and the country is To Lam, a leader who became internationally infamous when photographs emerged of him eating a gold leaf-crusted steak prepared by celebrity chef Salt Bae in London while millions of Vietnamese scraped by. Which brings us to the leadership question, and perhaps Lee's most fundamental reservation about Vietnam. Before his death, he was blunt about the quality of its leaders, stating, "Vietnam's older generation of communist leaders is incapable of breaking out of a fundamentally socialist mindset. They have not since come close to exhibiting the genuine determination to overhaul the system that one finds in China. These old guard leaders are keeping Vietnam stagnant. Until they pass on, the country will not make breakthroughs in its bid to modernize." However, in 2024, the last of Vietnam's war generation leaders died in office at 80. For the first time, Vietnam's leadership has been entirely passed to a new generation, one with only distant memories of the war. While Lee never lived to see this generational shift, the question he spent decades asking remains unanswered, whether Vietnam's new leadership can finally match the quality of its people. But there are reasons to be optimistic. As Lee concluded, the Vietnamese are among the most capable and energetic people in Southeast Asia. Their students who come to Singapore on ASEAN scholarships are serious about their studies and score the highest grades. With people of such intelligence, it is a real pity that they are falling short of their potential. Hopefully, when the war generation fades away and a younger group takes over, they will look at how well Thailand has done and become convinced of the importance of the free market. While Thailand today remains significantly richer on a per capita basis, Vietnam is closing the gap at breakneck speed. With Hanoi targeting an ambitious 10% growth rate, it's a race against time to modernize its infrastructure and escape the middle income trap, all while navigating intensifying US-China tensions, an aging population, and the global energy shocks of the Iran conflict.